There are only two people waiting for execution in the state of Montana. Montana is the only state that still hasn't given a death sentence to anyone in the 21st century out of those that still have the death penalty. In 1996 was the most recent instance in which the state gave the capital punishment to a defendant. Since the last execution in 2006, when David Thomas Dawson was put to death for 3 murders, the state has gone more than 15 years without performing a single execution. The lethal injection is the only method of execution approved in Montana, and this is the only state in which, instead of a jury or a 3-judge panel, the trial judge decides the sentence. Both the murder charge and the aggravating factors that qualify the defendant for the death penalty are determined by the jury. William J. Golhon, 30 years on death row. After fatally beating fellow prisoner Gerald Pileggi in the Montana State Prison in 1990 with a baseball bat, Golhon and Douglas Turner received a death sentence in 1992. Gerald Pileggi's brutal beaten body was discovered on September 2, 1990, laying in the exercise yard of the Montana State Prison in Deer Lodge, Montana. Witnesses reported seeing prisoners William J. Golhon and Douglas Turner repeatedly hit Pileggi with baseball bats. The victim suffered severe head injuries, including a strike to the top of his head that caused part of his skull to cave in and a blow to the side of his face that caused his forehead to collapse, ripped his brain, and burst one of his eyes, according to an autopsy. Golhon was already serving a 130-year sentence for the 1985 murder of a woman in Billings. Moreover, he is in prison for his part in the riot there in 1991. Douglas Turner, who was also sentenced to death alongside Golhon, was found dead in his cell on July 8, 2003, at 31 years old. Turner, a 9-time killer, was imprisoned for over half of his brief life. In 1987, less than a month after turning 16, he committed his first murder when he shot and killed 3 neighbors in Glendive, Montana. Turner received a 100-year prison term at the state penitentiary in Deer Lodge, despite not being a legal adult. He took part in Gerald Pileggi's murder 2 years later. Turner participated in the tragic riot at the facility in 1991, which resulted in the deaths of 5 additional inmates less than a year later. In addition to the death sentence he was already serving, he was then given a life term for these killings as well. On the morning of September 22, 1991, Golhon was one of 13 prisoners in the workout yards. He and 8 other inmates burst through the wire fences dividing the exercise field and eventually got entrance to the area of maximum security building connecting to A, B, and C blocks when guards were bringing some of the prisoners from the exercise yards back to their cells. While inside the structure, the convicts were able to access both control cages and eventually managed to unlock all of the maximum security units' doors. 5 officers took refuge by locking themselves in a shower facility in Block C when the convicts were in charge of the building. If the cops did not give up the keys to other parts of the building, the convicts threatened to burn them out of the shower. They said that they would proceed to Block D and grab the inmates under protective custody when the officers cooperated. The officers didn't come out of the shower until other officers found them after the riot. 2 prisoners in protective custody barricaded themselves in the laundry room while conducting labor outside their cells. Golhon and the other rioting convicts attempted in vain to smash down the door and to build a fire to smoke them out of the laundry area. One of the prisoners scrawled the names of the convicts attempting to get at them on the dryer's side at one point, since they didn't think they would survive the attack. The name of Golhon was mentioned. The rioting convicts invaded Block D, opened the cells, and then killed 5 of the detainees in protective custody after being unable to reach the inmates in the laundry area. Golhon received 5 life in prison sentences at this trial on top of the death penalty. Ronald Allen Smith, 39 years on death row. Smith, a Canadian who was born on September 7, 1957, was given the death penalty in Montana for a double homicide. After his request for the death penalty following his conviction, Smith received a death sentence in March 1983. He and an accomplice, Rodney Monroe, killed 2 Native American men who granted them a ride while hitchhiking 7 months earlier, while both being on LSD. They led cousins Thomas Running Rabbit, 20 years old, and Harvey Crazy Man, 23 years old, into the woods next to the highway, where they shot them both in the head with a sawed-off 22 caliber rifle. Smith and Monroe wanted to steal the victim's car, according to testimony in court. At the time, Smith added that he was curious about what it felt like to murder someone. Smith declined a plea deal that would have spared him the death penalty in exchange for a life sentence in prison. 3 weeks after entering a guilty plea, he requested and received the death penalty. Afterwards, of course, he had the change of heart. Monroe accepted the plea deal, was later moved to a Canadian prison, and has been out of jail since 1998. The Canadian government had been following Smith's case since 1983, and consular representatives regularly communicated with Smith. They also talked to his attorney, prison staff, the Office of the Governor of Montana, various Montana state officials, and the U.S. Department of State. Smith's clemency was sought in 1997 by Canadian consular representatives on humanitarian reasons, and the Governor of Montana expressed some sympathy to these demands. However, the Canadian government declared on October or November 2007 that Smith would not be granted clemency. They had previously announced a new policy that stated multiple murderers and mass murderers who are convicted in democracies that uphold the rule of law cannot necessarily count on a plea for clemency from the Canadian government and repatriation back to this country. Previously, the government had always sought clemency through diplomatic channels for Canadians who were sentenced to death in foreign nations. Smith was scheduled for execution on a number of occasions, but each execution was overturned. The United States Supreme Court rejected a petition for review in November 2001, and in 2010 it declined to hear his final appeal. As a result, the case was returned to the state of Montana for a new execution date. In an interview with Carolyn Dunn for CBC, Smith said he is a changed man and he deserves to live. I realize, just through interactions with my own family, I realize what I've done to the families of the two victims. So there's no doubt there's a lot of remorse. I'd give anything to be able to go back and change that day. I can't. Smith stated that he is happy to serve his time in prison for his crimes, but he would like to go to a Canadian prison because he has a daughter, 2 sisters, grandchildren, and a great-grandchild there. Smith's execution is the only thing that will offer peace to the family of one victim at least. I wouldn't have to think about it every day, said Thomas Running Rabbit Sr. Every day I get up, I sit and drink a cup of coffee, and I look at my son's picture and think about it. It's just like it happened yesterday. There's no change. Ronald Allen Smith is the only Canadian on death row in the United States. Because the state of Montana requires the use of an ultra-fast-acting barbiturate, which is no longer available, all executions have been put on hold since 2015. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye-bye.